Welcome to another Ember Weekend. I'm Chase McCarthy.
And I'm Jonathan Jackson. And the first thing that we're going to talk about today are some corrections that were kind of brought up. Past episodes, we've mentioned that Ember Object Proxy and Ember Array Proxy are going the way of the dodo. But in actuality, Ember Array Proxy is still, its visibility is still public, and there are no known to us efforts to make it private. And Ember Object Proxy, however, is actually marked as private. There is an issue out that basically has back and forth between Steph Penner, a few other people, and Robert Jackson. And the end result was that they kind of agreed that it should be made public, or if there is a goal to make it to be private, that would go through a formal deprecation process. So basically, we just wanted to make sure that everyone knows that you can still use Ember Array Proxy, and pending the approval of the visibility change to Object Proxy, you can use that as well. And it's, all greenfield happy path. I had just assumed that these were going away because they are the underlying primitives behind Array Controller and Object Controller. But in fact, they still have applications outside of that. In fact, we use array proxies on Ember Weekend, and it's kind of great to be able to pull out an object and perform manipulations whenever you request something from an array, and kind of do some cool stuff. And object proxies are really cool for like asynchronous computed properties, like a computed property macro that returns asynchronous stuff. You can return the proxy object right away, and then it'll fill in its own information when it resolves. Things like that. There's definitely a lot of uses for both object proxy and array proxy, and I think object proxy is going to be made public because ostensibly it already is public. There's a lot of people using it. Many library maintainers and library authors are using it. So definitely something that we wanted to make sure that we pointed out. Thanks to Torn Billups for pointing this out to us via Twitter. Super great to have feedback from our listeners. And Torn Billups, man, that guy knows how to Vim. I saw him at EmberConf. It was amazing. So next we're going to talk about ember-cli-cordova and more specifically Chase's efforts and endeavors in this area. So Cordova is I want to say the leading branch of PhoneGap. So it lets you write web views and gives you access to some of the native APIs through plugins, and you can compile to a target like iOS or Android, and distribute your application. Your web application to these mobile platforms. And it's really cool. Obviously it's not going to be the best solution for things like, like a video game or something like that, where, you might want to optimize and really utilize the hardware. But for many, many applications, it's an amazing fit for the speed in which you can develop and, the ease in which you can roll out upgrades and changes. So it's definitely, something we've been, working with here at HashRocket quite a bit. And we're seeing a lot of mobile requests lately, so it's kind of cool, and we're definitely diving into it much more exhaustively. And I think Chase, you've been working with some specific Ember add-ons to make all of this stuff feel more native, I want to say.
Yeah, we've had a couple of apps come in where there's an existing application in either iOS or Android, and they want the kind of like a similar looking app written in another platform. And a lot of times, since we're a web shop, they're also coming in and saying we also want to make a mobile website to kind of match the same features. And when they talk about that, we're immediately considering the idea of making the mobile website and doing it in a way that can be cross-platform deployed to any app store. And so there's a couple libraries. Obviously, we're using ember-cli-cordova, but for UI, mobile UI is difficult to get right, and you don't want to really roll it on every single application. So there's a lot of great libraries out there that give you mobile elements to look native. So there's like Framework 7, which gives you iOS 7 look and feel.
I've messed with that. The website for that is really cool too, like because it has like the embedded. I want to say it's an iframe where it has an actual little iPhone mock-up, and you can actually interact with it. It's very cool.
Right. Yeah. And then there's also Ionic. And Ionic's nice. It looks very much like iOS 7, but it also has some mix where it kind of starts looking like Android. It looks like they've kind of meshed the two together so that if you make an app that looks the same on both, kind of both sides are happy with the look and feel. They both kind of look native. You can also gear them more toward one or the other. But so there's an add-on for this called Ember Ionic because the main Ionic JavaScript is actually written for Angular. So I think this is Eric Brin who started this, and there's it's been around for a little while, but I ran into some problems trying to use it because he's using, at least in his demo, he's using angle bracket components. And recently, since I'm using the latest version of Ember, I'm actually on Canary. There are some problems. Recently, angle bracket components have changed the way they work, and you actually have to. We talked about this last week. You have to inherit from Glimmer component in order to get that.
Right. Yeah. I definitely see this being not too big of a deal to make sure you stay up with the changes, but yeah, it's definitely got to be. It's definitely one more kind of hurdle to jump over to set this up. But before we continue, can we just talk about how difficult it is to say Ionic? Ionic. I always want to say iconic every time I see it, without fail, every single time. It's so crazy. I don't even know.
There probably is an Ember iconic, like an icon framework.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. That'd be amazing. See them like lined up alphabetically on Ember Observer. Like, oh no, I don't know which one's which.
So yeah, and then mistype them as your npm installing.
Oh, of course,
or your Ember installing. So a couple of the other changes I had to make in order to kind of make this work the way I needed, due to mostly changes with Ember. The way that you kind of register child components render inside of a parent component. I know John's talked about this before. Like kind of like child-parent communication happening between components. There was a lot of that happening in here because depending on how, like what child you rendered in Ember Iconic, so you got me doing it. It's Ember Ionic.
It's Ember Ionic, man. It's easy. It's easy.
You shouldn't have even mentioned it. Now, like
I was
fine.
Put the seed of doubt in your mind,
yeah,
and now
I'm
it's
always
just
gonna say it.
Gone.
I'm gonna say Ember I.
Ember I.
So in Ember Ionic. When you render a child component, a certain child component, say like I think it's an ion item, if you render that inside of an ion list parent, it renders different depending on what properties you set on the item. The parent may render differently, and depending on what properties you set on the parent, the child may render differently. So there's some really weird crosstalk that happens between these, and that just has to do with kind of the way that it was geared, kind of written for Angular. It wasn't so much component, it wasn't so isolated in the components, and so there was a lot of ways to talk and pass variables between them. But now writing them kind of in the Ember component style, you have to have defined channels to get that data back in. And so I actually have seen this multiple times in frameworks where they have these handles where when the child is rendered, it says look at my surrounding context, find a certain type, and then register myself with that type, and then that type when on registration changes the behavior of the child, and that's feels very magical, and it's not like there's a defined way for that to happen. So usually what I end up doing is I try to write it in a way where you have a multiple yield format. So if that's what you're really trying to do, is you're trying, like some frameworks will say, when you render here, you're going to render inside of a header area. When this other type renders, it's going to render in a footer area. If that's really what you're trying to do, you can actually mimic the ability, like say of Rails templates, to yield a type. So you can, from the parent template, you can actually say yield and give a property called, like, say footer as a string, and then the child can respond, and when it handles the block, it can say if the section that's being rendered is footer, render this one thing. If the section's being rendered is a header, render another thing. It's a pretty decent pattern.
So you're kind of faking the yield system out with this. Actually sounds vaguely reminiscent of the way that Content4 is working inside of Ember.cli. Yeah,
there have been multiple discussions. Every time I want this behavior, I always check and make sure it hasn't already been done, or hasn't been implemented, in Ember. And I've seen a lot of discussions about it, and it seems to be a feature that's desired, but I think it's more of like an implementation. Like, how do you get this to work? How does it work? Maybe there's some performance implications, because like now when a block renders, it's like one or the other thing will always like not everything will render. It's gonna be called, like, say 3 times. And one thing's going to render one time, one's going to render another. There may be performance implications with that.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely something to keep an eye out. But this multi-yield pattern, I think, is pretty solid. I've seen it a few times. We've tried to dabble with it in Ember Weekend, I want to say.
Yeah.
But ended up going with something else, because very, very frequently there are like kind of shortcuts you can take and to avoid using a multi-yield pattern, where maybe just abstracting a new component or something like that will do. But when that's not possible, this is a really good tool to reach for. So,
right.
Very cool. And you're using this mostly to kind of like make Cordova, look kind of nice and native. And
yeah, it's to get the ionic elements to render properly and in the right places. But after doing those couple things, just updating the Glimmer components, and then changing these couple layout issues, Ember Ionic works fine. So the next thing I ended up using was Ember Collection. And Ember Collection is awesome. It's like the next kind of iteration, I guess, of Ember List View. So I believe the repo is actually like a clone of Ember List View that's been like wiped or something. Like it doesn't have the history, but there's definitely tests in there that look like they came from Ember List View.
Yeah, I think this is like the direct successor. It's kind of the List View version of, or like it's List View for 1.13 plus. So Glimmer List View, and there's been a lot of work being put into it. I think we talked about this, I want to say last week or 2 weeks ago, and it's definitely something that is worthwhile, especially for these kind of like native feeling apps where you want that kind of swipey scroll kind of feel, and it's super cool. There's a Slack channel called Dev Ember Collection where there's a lot of people like actively contributing to it, so it's pretty cool.
Yeah, and it worked pretty much out of the box. I know there had been some issues before where it didn't work on iOS because of the native scrolling. Basically, when you try to scroll, iOS wasn't telling Ember that you had scrolled, and so that nothing new would render. That all seems to be fixed. I'm able to use it in iOS now. There's a couple things that I really think I need though, because in Cordova, the biggest problem is memory. Cordova's because your web views could load a ton of GIFs or something. You can easily run over your allocated amount of memory, and you get memory warnings. Then eventually you get shut down because you've used up too much memory. So one of the things that this needs, because I tried to do a stress test on it and have like 10,000 items with GIFs in it, motion GIFs.
I think they're Nicolas Cage GIFs actually.
Yeah,
is that true? I'm pretty sure I saw the Nicolas Cage wall.
There's just a wall of place cage.
Yep.
And yeah, so when all those load and you start scrolling through, everything's fine. It's moving pretty good. And all of a sudden you get a memory warning and then it crashes out. And there's some tricks you have to do in order to get this to work, where you basically have to set the source of this GIF to some blank pixel once it goes off screen. But I have no real time. I don't know when to do this. So one of the things that'd be really nice with Ember Collection would be like a reuse hook. Basically say this, like kind of iOS style, like this cell at index whatever is about to be reused, to give you some time to like clean it up. And then there's also this kind of behavior that it has that when you scroll, it's like a blank cell comes into view if you scroll too fast. And what would be really nice is to be able to do that Facebook style, like kind of ghosted images and text blocks. But in order to do that, you basically need to know that the cell is like kind of about to come into view, so that you can render something that's really fast, like just a blank, like a gray square or something instead of the image, and like some gray blocks instead of the text.
Yeah, I think Facebook does little bars, and Pinterest does color gradient, which is pretty sweet.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a whole bunch of things that would be really fast to load. That would be really nice.
Yeah,
like maybe like a really dim kind of grayed out version of Nicolas Cage, so that when the GIF comes in and starts animating, you're like, oh yeah, that was supposed to be a Cage, but it's loading. It's cool.
I just want like a stick figure version of Cage, like that just loads really fast.
Stickolas Cage.
Oh man, get that domain. Yeah, so there's a lot of work I've been doing with Cordova. So far I'm really happy with how fast that I can develop. I used to do mobile development. Don't tell anyone. I really don't like doing it, and I think this is a much better solution in my mind. Like I get to use the skills I built up for web. I'm not solving the same problem in 4 different ways depending on what platform I'm on. I really think this is the way that, especially when you're mocking up an app and you don't really know what you want, it's much easier to develop a mobile website. And if you want to just get it on an application and see how people like it, then you can deploy it with Cordova. Maybe once it gets nailed down and you really that's exactly what your users want, then write it native.
Yeah, I think that's a really good insight. Something that I've seen here a lot is mobile work in iOS tends to be a lot more rigid than web development. So when style changes need to come in, in web, you're like, oh yeah, we'll just move that around. But in iOS, that ends up being like a considerable amount of work for what appear to the client as a trivial change. So I think definitely trying to solidify needs with this is great. And some apps like this suits better just in the long run as well. Actually, probably many. So I think it's definitely a technology worth considering.
Yeah.
fellow Rocketeer Micah Woods put out an article recently about how to write smoke tests for an Ember Rails stack, and this is a topic that's really important to me because I think there's testing is something that I really value, and I've worked on projects like this, ember-cli Rails. I worked with Pavel Provosid and Sean Doyle to help make that project kind of allow you to write full end-to-end acceptance tests in Ember and with the Rails backend, and it's been great, but there's some problems there. It still uses the Rails asset pipeline, so there's some performance things there. It simplifies deployment, or at least it did. I don't know if that's necessarily true anymore with some of the stuff with ember-cli deploy. In this article, Micah Woods kind of outlines his proposal for kind of how to allow Cucumber integration tests or RSpec integration tests outside of your Ember or your Rails app that kind of boots both of them up and then runs it against them. And his gem is called Exhaust. And I'm going to try it very soon on a production app to see if we can pull. We have a lot of Cucumber tests that test the app end to end, and see if we can pull it over and do this new style. And then deployments become more conventional, and asset management and knowing where things belong becomes a lot more clear because basically Ember is all of the static front end assets, and then Rails is just the API. Whereas kind of right now there's a little bit of murkiness in most solutions that I've seen with Rails too. So I'm definitely excited about the work he's been doing, and the blog post is really fun to read too. He's got a very unique kind of flair. So
yeah, I actually Mike asked both of us to help him edit, make sure there weren't any problems, and yeah, it seemed like it was a great article. Like you said, it's pretty funny. He does definitely have like a sense of humor in it. Yeah, but definitely check it out if you're a Rails developer and you're learning Ember and you want to know how to pull it in. This is a really good way to be able to use ember-cli and all the things that has to offer, but still use all your knowledge with Rails. If you like Cucumber, you like RSpec, this is probably a good solution for you.
Definitely.
And that's all we have for this Ember Weekend. I'm Chase McCarthy.
And I'm Jonathan Jackson. And we'll see you next week.